In a world where political speeches are so often polished, rehearsed, and filtered through layers of diplomatic caution, what happened recently in Burkina Faso felt like a lightning strike across the African continent. It was the kind of moment that does not simply appear on a news feed. It cuts through the noise. It forces people to stop to breathe and to ask themselves whether they just witnessed a turning point in history. And for many older Americans especially, those who lived through the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, and the painful assassinations of public figures who dared to speak uncomfortable truths, the weight of such a moment feels familiar, almost haunting. On national television, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, just 36 years old, looked straight into the camera with a calmness that felt sharper than anger. And he said what no African leader has ever dared to say so openly: that many African heads of state do not like him, that they pretend to support him while secretly wishing him gone, that they are jealous, that they see him as a danger, a threat to their carefully constructed political systems. It was not the voice of a man seeking pity. It was the voice of a man who has survived 7 assassination attempts, who wakes up each morning knowing that someone somewhere is plotting his fall. And yet, he chose transparency, chose to speak directly to his people and to the world. For an American viewer in their 60s, it may echo memories of leaders who tried to challenge powerful structures and paid the highest price. This moment in Burkina Faso is not just a political statement. It is a warning flare, a declaration, a confession, and perhaps even a plea for understanding from anyone willing to listen. So, we must ask ourselves, why would a sitting president break the unwritten rules of African diplomacy so boldly? What pressure must he be facing behind closed doors? And if his words are true, then what does this reveal about the deeper struggle unfolding across Africa today? When Captain Ibrahim Traoré appeared on national television during that now historic broadcast, the room seemed unusually still, not because of the cameras, not because of the formal setting, but because of the weight of what was coming. Those who watched him closely noticed something different in his expression, a mix of firmness and weariness, the kind that only leaders under immense pressure ever show. And then, with a steady voice, he dropped a revelation so raw, so unfiltered, that it immediately rippled across the continent. He said, "There are many African heads of state who do not like me. Many pretend to like me, but they don't. Maybe they are jealous. Maybe they think I'm a danger to them." To hear a sitting African president say this openly, without coded language or diplomatic disguise, was like watching a taboo shatter in real time. For decades, African leaders maintained a silent pact, never publicly expose division, never acknowledge betrayal within the continent, always present unity to the outside world. Traoré did the opposite. He took that unwritten rule and tore it apart. And for the people of Burkina Faso, for Africans across borders, and for older Americans watching from afar, the message was unmistakable. This young leader is surrounded by dangers stronger and closer than most knew. In Africa's political culture, public criticism among heads of state almost never happens. Leaders shake hands at summits, exchange polite speeches, and smile for cameras, even when intelligence reports suggest they are funding rebels against each other. For Ibrahim Traoré to say on live television that fellow presidents pretend to like him was not merely unusual, it was revolutionary. This statement didn't just break protocol, it exposed it. It called out an entire system built on secrecy, distrust, and hidden agendas. And for millions of ordinary Africans who have long felt that their leaders cooperate only in public while competing in private, Traoré's honesty felt like a confirmation of something they already suspected. What makes this statement even more alarming is the documented pattern behind it. Since taking power in September 2022, Traoré has reportedly survived at least 7 assassination attempts. Not rumors, not speculation. Documented attempts, some involving senior officers, others involving foreign-backed actors, and still others involving networks inside the Sahel. One of the most chilling episodes involved soldiers close to his personal security detail being approached with briefcases of cash. Millions of dollars were allegedly offered, along with promises of exile in Europe, new identities, and lifetime protection. The plotters believed that money, as it had so many times in African political history, could buy betrayal. But they miscalculated. Traoré's inner circle refused. They reported the attempt. They uncovered more conspirators. Their refusal came not from fear, but from conviction, because many of them sleep in the same barracks as the president, eat the same food, endure the same hardships. Their loyalty is not purchased, it is lived. This, more than anything, explains why Traoré's enemies consider him dangerous. And here lies the core of the shock Traoré is not saying. The greatest threat to him comes from Western powers, extremist groups, or foreign corporations. Though those threats exist, he is saying the most painful threat comes from within the continent itself, from leaders who see in him a mirror of what they failed to become, from leaders who fear that his example will awaken their own populations. His accusation suggests a continental political battlefield that the public rarely sees, one where jealousy, fear of reform, economic interests, and foreign alliances intersect. For older American viewers, it recalls moments when leaders who pushed too hard for reform at home or abroad became targets of forces more powerful than their office. Thus, Traoré's revelation was not merely an emotional outburst. It was a strategic and moral declaration, an exposure of hidden tensions that few dare to discuss. And it raises a troubling question: if a leader's greatest enemies are not outside his borders, but sitting beside him at continental meetings, what future does that continent face? If the first part of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's speech broke protocol, the next part tore straight into the heart of Africa's political consciousness. The moment he shifted from personal confession to continental declaration, the atmosphere seemed to change. His tone deepened, his gaze sharpened, and his message expanded far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. He said, "We are not fighting for Burkina Faso alone. We are fighting for Africa. We are fighting for the black man. We are fighting for the dignity of our populations." Those words hit like a shockwave. They carried a weight that resonated not just in Ouagadougou, but in Dakar, Addis Ababa, Kinshasa, Nairobi, and Johannesburg. Suddenly, this was no longer about one leader and his enemies. It was about the future of an entire continent. Pan-African rhetoric is not new. Leaders have spoken of unity before. But what made Traoré's declaration different was its clarity and its conviction. There was no diplomatic cushion, no vague metaphor, no attempt to soften the edges. He was not simply describing a dream, he was identifying enemies, calling out hypocrisy, and demanding a reckoning. For many African leaders, especially those who rely on external alliances, resource contracts, and political patronage, Traoré's message was nothing short of dangerous. Because if an entire generation of Africans begins to believe they can reclaim their resources, restructure their governments, and break away from foreign dependence, then the political systems built over decades could unravel overnight. What followed his speech was even more revealing than the speech itself. Silence. No condemnation. No comment. No official reaction. A silence that speaks louder than any press release. Behind the scenes, however, the panic was real. Diplomats reportedly exchanged frantic messages. Ministers privately questioned how Traoré dared to break the gentleman's agreement of African leadership. WhatsApp groups of foreign ministers lit up with concerns, anger, and fear of what this speech might unleash. How dare he? How far will he go? Won't this embolden his people and ours? The continent's political elite recognized immediately what the public heard, a challenge to the old order. While leaders stayed silent, the people did not. Across multiple African countries, the speech spread like wildfire. On TikTok, Facebook, WhatsApp, and YouTube, clips of Traoré's most powerful lines went viral. Young Africans called him the new Sankara, while older Africans compared him to early-era Nkrumah or Lumumba leaders, whose dreams of continental independence threatened global powers and triggered deadly consequences. Crowds gathered in Ouagadougou waving flags. In Ghana, Nigeria, Mali, and the DR Congo, influencers and commentators dissected his words. Many expressed admiration for his courage. Others expressed fear for his safety. But nearly all agreed on one thing: no leader in modern Africa has spoken with this level of transparency and conviction. Then Traoré went deeper, far deeper than most expected. He reminded Africa of its wounds: slavery, colonization, exploitation, internal betrayal, and centuries of manipulation. His words carried an emotional force that connected with millions who still feel the lingering shadows of that history. He spoke of ancestors who survived what no other people could have survived. He spoke of Africans being turned against each other, of weapons shipped in so Africans could kill one another, of foreign interests fueling conflict for profit. For many older American viewers, especially Black Americans, these themes resonate powerfully. The echoes of historical oppression, resilience, and the struggle for dignity form a bridge between continents. In one of the most heartfelt sections of the broadcast, Traoré turned his attention to unity. Not just political unity, but generational unity. He urged Africa's youth to rise with knowledge and confidence. But he also asked the elders, those who witnessed colonialism, coups, civil wars, or military rule, to guide the young and share their lessons. He framed unity not as a slogan, but as a survival requirement. Africa will awaken, he declared. Africa is the continent of the future. These are bold words, possibly dangerous words. But for millions of Africans, they were words they had been waiting decades to hear. This was the climax of his message, a direct call for continental awakening and a warning to those who oppose it. The fire he lit in this speech did not stay contained in Burkina Faso. It spread, igniting hope, fear, anger, and inspiration across the continent. When the dust began to settle, after Captain Ibrahim Traoré's explosive speech, the reality of its consequences came sharply into focus. Moments like these, when a sitting president exposes the hidden machinery of continental politics, always send tremors through society. And in Burkina Faso, those tremors quickly grew into waves. Inside the country, the first impact was an immediate tightening of security. Roads leading to government buildings saw reinforced checkpoints. Soldiers increased patrols around sensitive zones in Ouagadougou. And within the military command, conversations became more cautious, more subdued. Traoré's revelation created a new understanding. If the president himself is openly acknowledging hostility from fellow African leaders, then the threats are not abstract. They are active, persistent, and near. Burkina Faso was already grappling with economic pressure and a brutal insurgency in the Sahel. The president's honesty did not create new enemies, but it exposed the intensity of the existing ones. And exposure comes with consequences. Foreign aid, already inconsistent, became even more uncertain. Investors who once tolerated instability now saw a political climate too unpredictable to risk involvement. Several analysts warned that Burkina Faso's refusal to play by the rules as dictated by powerful global and regional actors, might lead to subtle forms of economic isolation. Across Africa, Traoré's words acted like a pressure test on the diplomatic system. The facade of unity began to crack quietly but unmistakably. Some leaders felt implicated, even though he named no one. Others feared that their populations might interpret Traoré's honesty as a contrast to their own silence. And a few, especially younger politicians in reformist circles, privately admired the courage, but lacked the freedom to support him openly. The African Union, already criticized for being disconnected from the people it claims to represent, found itself in an uncomfortable position. Traoré's message implied that many within the AU's leadership class are working against genuine sovereignty. That suggestion alone was enough to destabilize internal alliances. This is the danger of telling the truth too clearly. It forces everyone to choose a side, even those who desperately want to remain neutral. Traoré hinted repeatedly that he was not revealing everything he knew. And that small detail, the information he chose not to say, may be the most frightening part of all. Intelligence agencies across the Sahel are active, interconnected, and often influenced by external interests. When a leader challenges neo-colonial systems, disrupts mining contracts, and restricts dependency on international institutions, he inevitably draws the attention of actors with far-reaching capabilities. While the speech never named foreign governments, the references were unmistakable. Economic pressure, covert destabilization, arms flows that mysteriously increase whenever Burkina Faso refuses to submit. For an older American viewer, this pattern echoes familiar stories, from the 20th century stories of leaders who resisted international pressure and suddenly found themselves fighting invisible enemies. Insurgent groups in the Sahel operate like sharks in turbulent waters. Whenever political tensions rise, they grow bolder. Traoré's speech, while powerful, risked sending a signal of vulnerability to these groups. If they believe the government is consumed by political conflict, internal or continental, they may intensify attacks. And each attack, each village, raid, each ambush drains the government's resources, increases public anxiety, and gives foreign actors more leverage. Stability in Burkina Faso is not simply a domestic issue, it is a regional fault line. Traoré's call for African unity and sovereignty inspired millions. But inspiration alone cannot shield a leader from the consequences of challenging entrenched power structures. His words lit a spark among ordinary Africans, but they also lit a fuse among those who benefit from the status quo. This is what makes his speech a double-edged sword. On one side, it awakened hope, courage, and a renewed sense of African identity. On the other, it intensified the determination of those who prefer a fragmented, dependent continent. Traoré has chosen a dangerous road, the road of reformers who refuse to bow, who refuse to be silent, who refuse to pretend. History shows that such leaders rarely walk that road without paying a price. And now, the world is watching. Especially the United States, which has long held strategic interests across Africa. Traoré's message has implications far beyond Burkina Faso. For many Americans, especially those over 60 who have lived long enough to see the rise and fall of countless global movements, Ibrahim Traoré's message carries a mix of familiarity and unease. His words may echo memories of leaders who challenged global power structures during the Cold War, leaders who tried to assert sovereignty, who resisted external influence, and who paid a heavy price for their defiance. The tone, the urgency, and the moral conviction in his speech remind some viewers of political figures who refused to compromise their beliefs even when surrounded by enemies. From an American perspective, Traoré's speech raises an unavoidable question. What does a truly independent African state mean for U.S. strategic interests? Burkina Faso sits in the Sahel, a region Washington monitors closely because of terrorism, mineral resources, migration routes, and global competition with other powers. When a leader like Traoré signals that he is pulling away from foreign influence, refusing traditional aid structures, and reclaiming control of natural resources, American policymakers take notice. Not necessarily because they oppose Burkina Faso's independence, but because such moves can disrupt long-established geopolitical balance. A country asserting absolute autonomy forces other nations to adjust their calculus diplomatically, economically, and militarily. For example, when Traoré speaks openly about African leaders working for imperial interests, older American viewers, those who remember Vietnam-Angola, the fall of the Soviet bloc, or U.S. intervention debates, may recognize the pattern. It is a familiar narrative, a young leader rising with a bold ideology, challenging entrenched systems, and facing pushback from regional elites and global actors alike. But America does not view Traoré solely through the lens of threat. Many Americans, especially those who lived through the civil rights movement, understand the deep history of global struggles for dignity. They hear echoes of leaders who demanded equality, sovereignty, and respect. And they may feel a quiet empathy seeing a young African president fighting forces larger than himself, much like reformers of the past. At the same time, U.S. officials will undoubtedly analyze how Traoré's message influences regional stability. The Sahel is too strategically important for the world to ignore. A charismatic leader who inspires continental movements is both a source of hope and a potential catalyst for political turbulence. And so, from Washington to Brussels, from Paris to London, Traoré is not dismissed. He is studied. Carefully. Quietly. Because leaders who speak with this level of conviction often shape history one way or another. As we step back and look at the full weight of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's message, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. He is not merely speaking as the president of Burkina Faso. He is speaking as a man who believes he stands on the front line of a continental battle for dignity, sovereignty, and the future of Africa itself. Whether one agrees with his ideology or questions his approach, it is undeniable that few leaders today speak with such moral force, and fewer still speak with such personal risk. His words leave us with a series of questions that echo long after the broadcast ends. If a leader who invests in agriculture, healthcare, and national self-reliance becomes a target, then what forces are truly shaping Africa's political destiny? If transparency is dangerous, what does that reveal about the systems operating in the shadows? If unity threatens certain leaders, then how fragile is the continent's path toward independence? And perhaps the most important question for all of us, especially for American viewers over 60 who have witnessed similar struggles across the world, is this. Do you think President Ibrahim Traoré's national reform strategies are truly effective yet? Or, as some Africans quietly wonder, should the continent place its trust in Traoré? Or is it time to consider who might follow him, and at what cost? These are not abstract debates. These are questions that touch the future of millions, the stability of a region, and the hopes of a generation that refuses to inherit a broken system. As we close this analysis, it is impossible not to reflect on the emotional core of Traoré's message. Beneath the political tension, beneath the diplomatic shockwaves, there is a simple plea. Let Africa stand with dignity. Let Africa rise together. Let its youth dream without fear. Let its leaders fight for their people, not for foreign favors. And so, to those who care about the truth behind the headlines, to those who follow Africa news closely, to those who believe that the story of Burkina Faso and Ibrahim Traoré is far from over, Your voice matters. Please share if you feel that you are among the first to stand with President Ibrahim Traoré. Subscribe if you believe that truth is more important than headlines. Because this conversation is not ending here. This is only the beginning of a much larger story, one that will shape Africa's future and perhaps the world's.